Well, good evening and welcome to Sunday Night Alive. And I want to get you ready for next week. Our program is on how to study the Bible. It's a very informative program run by a lady named Lavinia Spirito, a very Catholic lady in the Diocese of Lexington, Kentucky. Worked out a beautiful program that I really wanted you to get, and she's bringing herself up here to have the broadcast on her own because I don't have a budget. Before we get into our program, I have a few people to say a few things about. This is the New York Times. They have come to new lows. You know, you wonder how bad the New York Times can be, and it keeps getting worse, I have to say. And this was a paper I read for 50 years, and now I have to borrow old copies because I wouldn't buy it. We have a little article this week, this Sunday. Maureen Dowd, an editorial writer, was constantly attacking the church. She tells us she's a Catholic. With Catholics like this, we don't need communists. But her article is "Rome Fiddles, We Burn. The Church Continues to Disenchant, Damage Its Moral Prestige." And then, worse yet, how is that possible? The main article of the New York Times magazine section for July 18th, with a cover on the article, is the new abortion providers. And they are celebrated very much as abortion providers. They're young doctors, obstetrician gynecologists, and family physicians who are incorporating pregnancy termination into their work with patients. Pregnancy termination. Pregnancy termination. What does that mean? You know, what does that mean? It means the killing of the wholly innocent. It means something. If you could picture it, it's hideous. And the broken, cut, dissected body of an infant is down the drain. How in the world can any present this in a nicely way? I have to say that they outdid Hitler when he called it the ultimate solution in the Jewish problem by killing millions of people. This is, it is nothing, the same kind of thing. Of course, the horror of the Holocaust stands by itself. But here is a murdering of 40 million human beings. Now we're about ready to pass the number of Hitler. The estimation is that Hitler and Stalin each had caused the violent death of 40 million people. We're just about to pass them. And isn't it nice? In this article, quotes, "I'm a Catholic girl from the suburbs, and she is a provider for abortion." The church responds to this by excommunication. But excommunication is very little. What does it respond to the words of the Lord himself? Thou shalt not kill. And Christ's special care for children, to think that they are killed because they're inconvenient. That's why children are killed. They're inconvenient. So we have an appalling things in the papers, and this is the New York Times, and many country newspapers around the country will pick up the New York Times attitudes and articles. And I would say to you, it's a very serious question if you should support the New York Times. I went to a rectory recently, and there was the New York Times. Should it be there? There are several other papers in New York, one in particularly, the Wall Street Journal, which is moving in such a way, covering all sorts of things that it never covered in the past. That even has obituaries, family news. Once in a while, it will put an article in that is objectionable, but nothing like the daily poison given out by the New York Times. I'm just be careful because I want to keep going. Our visitor this evening is Father Herald Brock, one of my confreres in the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal. I knew him when he was a very young man, and he will tell you how he came to join us. Extremely fine priest, and he's a missionary in Sudan. Years ago, 40, 50 years ago, religious orders all over the place of sisters, brothers, and priests had foreign missions all over the place. And many parts of the world were still rather primitive. That's kind of gone. And some of the big missionary orders have hardly any vocations at all. I'm happy to tell you that the Friars of the Renewal do have missions in Latin America, and now with Father Herald in Sudan. So welcome, Father Herald.
Thank you,
I'm
Father.
very honored to have you here representing the missions in Africa.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be able to be with you.
And tell us a little bit, how did you get to be a Friar of the Renewal?
Well, it began really with my spiritual conversion to Christ. I have the blessing of a strong Catholic family background, but as we know, sometimes we can get a little distracted by things in life, and it was actually at a youth conference at Franciscan University way back in the early 80s that was a kind of turning point in my life, and the importance of following Christ, which is really our call from baptism to be disciples of Christ, became very real to me. And that brought up the question, well then, what does Jesus want me to do? So often as children we're asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to be? And those aren't bad questions, but the bigger question is, what does God want me to do? And when I began to ask that question, I ran into St. Francis and saw the answer really in his life, his desire to live the gospel, his overwhelming awareness of the presence of Christ, the reality of Jesus. That led me to the Franciscans. I studied for 2 years, the last 2 years of university with the Capuchins, and then was looking for something else. And it was just about that time in 1987 when you and the other original friars began, the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal. And I first called Trinity Retreat. It was just a few months after you had begun the friars, and then later spoke to Father Glenn. And as you may remember, by November of that year, I was living with you at Trinity for about a year. And those are exciting times, the early years of the community. And it was wonderful to be able to be with you there at Trinity and travel around and do the food distributions at Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter, and to be part of this really wonderful and challenging new adventure in the church. Yeah.
Well, now, how in the world did you get to Sudan? And where you got before that?
Well, with the friars, as a priest, I had the opportunity to do preaching in a lot of different places throughout the United States and Europe. But at a particular point, I had a number of trips to developing countries, Mexico, Jamaica, and that was really an eye-opening experience for me. In the U.S., we have a lot of news coverage of the world. We're speaking about the New York Times and television. We have an intellectual awareness of what's going on. But when you bump up against the situation in a developing country firsthand, it can be another kind of experience. And when you look at that situation through the lens of the gospel and are aware of Christ's words, the way in which he identifies with the poor, that was really a very moving experience for me. So I was part of our first group of friars that went to Honduras shortly after the hurricane and the flood in the late 90s. We went to study Spanish and to help out, and it was then that Bishop Scarpone, Franciscan, originally from the Boston area, who was Bishop of Comayagua, invited us to come. And then in the Jubilee year, 2000, we opened friaries simultaneously in England and in Honduras. And I had the privilege of being one of the early friars in that mission. And as you know, with your help, we were able to do a number of things to not just to proclaim the gospel, certainly by our words and evangelization, but also by our deeds. The St. Benedict Joseph Medical Center, for example, that offers free surgery and care to people in the name of Jesus, but making that love tangible and concrete for them. And a number of other initiatives, including working with lay missionaries. You mentioned at the beginning of the show the importance of, if you will, reviving the missionary mandate of the church. So that was a beautiful experience. I spent almost 7 years there. And then the mission was going through a transition, and I had some health matters, which, thanks be to God, were able to be cleared up. So I was kind of at a new point, and looking for where might there be a possibility to bring the gospel, to bring the presence of Christ. And through some friends who had served in Sudan, I was able to make contact with the bishop of the Diocese of Torit, where I'm serving. It's in southeast Sudan on the Kenya border. And that's how I ended up there.
Yes, and it's very much a mission, is it not?
Very much so, Father. It's, as you know, the reality that has most impacted Sudan for the last quarter century is the civil war that ended in 2006. And while the church had a start there, it was part of that missionary endeavor. You were speaking about the Comboni missionaries particularly. The diocese was just devastated by the experience of the war, the loss of churches, the loss of priests, religious. So it's really at a moment of rebuilding in very, very primitive conditions.
Well, I would like to see some of the pictures on our TV of some of the ruins of churches. We have a couple of pictures of the churches were bombed, were they not?
They were targets for the air raids that took place because they knew that's where people gathered, and it was a way of kind of keeping people terrorized.
You can see the churches growing there, obviously.
It is, yeah. The earlier photos that were shown a few moments ago were baptisms and first communions in a mountain village that suffered from another act of aggression. Our diocese also borders on Uganda. And in Uganda, there was a rebel army called the LRA, supposedly the Lord's Resistance Army. And they would make incursions into South Sudan and kill mountain villagers just out of pure terror. In the village where we did the baptisms and first communions, it was the first one in 16 years, and a place where many adults had been killed by the LRA. So it was a beautiful experience. There were, I think, almost 70 baptisms and about 24 First Communions on that particular occasion. The photo we're looking at now is from a recent mission trip with friars and lay people. 4 of our friars came, 2 priests, 2 brothers, and we're walking through the fields in a mountain village called Chukudum, inviting people to an evening program of evangelization, but also making contact and giving the friars and lay missionaries who came a chance to kind of see life in Sudan up close. That's the First Communion from the mountain village of Katere, one of the young girls. You can see she's dressed up in her best clothes. It was really a beautiful occasion. The parish is named St. Martin de Porres, They don't have a church building, so we celebrate Mass under the trees. But it's a joyful celebration, and as you said, the community is growing, and God willing, someday soon there will be a church building there for them.
This is a wonderful opportunity to see the church growing right as it grassroots. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Just have a little break and start thinking about some things you'd like to say to Father Herald. Back with Father Herald in Sudan, and the picture that we have right before you is some children who had been giving a lot of food. You notice that they have distended stomachs. That doesn't mean that they had a lot to eat. That means starvation.
What happened, Father, was last year there was a very severe drought in that area of the world. And so the people there who survive on what they can cultivate suffered terrible, terrible hunger. And Bishop Pekio Johnson asked if there was something that might be able to be done. And so I turned to some of our friends in the United States, and through their generosity, we were able to deliver about 35 tons of food to 5 different communities. And the people were extremely grateful. This particular village, it's a place called Ramola, near the Uganda border. People were surviving on coconuts. And as you mentioned, the children's bellies were distended. The people were so grateful for the food that the little grains of corn that fell out of the sack on the ground were scooped up by the women to take home and to eat. So it was an incredible blessing, and really it helped keep some people alive. That food, that generosity. It was a new experience for me. I had never done anything quite like that, so it was a bit of an adventure. But it's a privilege to be able to extend that generosity from people here.
You're there in this picture with a couple of our other friars that went out in the summer.
That's right. That's a Father Lawrence and Brother John Baptist. It's where we did some mission work and where we were able to make 2 deliveries of food. When we were planning the mission trip, the pastor asked if we might be able to bring some additional food. I had an experience there that was really disturbing to me. We went to the little stream, there's a waterfall, just to see the natural beauty, and a man there asked me for food, and he lifted up his shirt to show me his stomach, and there were just folds of skin where there had been flesh. And it really disturbed me. And it was, again, I put out an appeal. We were able to bring an additional 11 tons of food there. And so it was beautiful to take the preaching of the gospel and a concrete gesture of the gospel to these people at the same time. Father Lawrence there is teaching the sign of the cross. These are children from the Didinga tribe. They live in a beautiful mountain village. And it's a place where many vocations have come historically from the church, but also suffered a lot during the war. So you can see how responsive they are, how happy they are to have somebody teaching them how to pray. All you have to do is stand still, and you have a little crowd around you. Reminds me of St. Francis Xavier talking about the children who wouldn't let him rest till he taught them a prayer. It's a typical scene from South Sudan. They live in huts that they can make completely from things from nature without any metal. So they have the thatched roof that's supported by bamboo rafters. They use either mud bricks or they weave bamboo around posts. And these particular huts come very close to the ground, so you can't quite see where the entrance is. It's kind of a little security measure. That's in a village called Kiala, which also suffered a great deal during the war. A lot of bombardment. They lost a lot of men and boys in the fighting back and forth between the Southern Army and the Khartoum Army. But you can see the beauty also. This is the little property the bishop has given us in Torit town. It came with the name already, the House of Mercy, a beautiful name. And it's, again, during this recent mission trip. It's Corpus Christi weekend. There's no church building in Torit. So we had to do everything out of doors. And again, you see the crowd, hundreds, even thousands came each night to hear the Word of God, to see some skits enacted, to see a film on the life of the saint. The banner below the sign for the House of Mercy is a photograph of a number of the Uganda martyrs. And it's very, very important and inspiring for the people of Sudan to see people who are close to them who have given a historic witness.
Many of our audience may not know who the martyrs of Uganda are. Many of our audience are Protestant or Jewish friends. Why don't you mention who that is?
Well, during the era of the great missionary orders that you mentioned, the White Fathers came to Uganda to evangelize. And they went to the Buganda people, the largest tribe in that area of Uganda, and began to preach. And they received a very strong positive response from some people who were members of the court of the king. Principal among them, Charles Lwanga. He's the most well-known. And so they began to be catechized, and they even created a momentum among themselves. At the same time, there was a conflicted response on the part of the king, and there were some things going on in the palace that were very unwholesome. So Charles Lwanga would protect these young men from some of the immorality taking place there. And the enemies of the Catholics kind of sowed seeds of doubt, and there was a very dramatic moment where the king asked the pages, the members of his court, to identify themselves that they were Christians. 22 young men, many of them between the ages of 14 and 21, stepped forward and said, I belong to Christ. Some of them were not even baptized. They were baptized the day they were martyred. Didn't even have the opportunity to receive their first communion. But what it says is there's an incredible nobility to the heart of Africans. There's a receptivity. There's a desire for truth. And you see that amazing response. And it's beautiful to be able to present them as models of the faith to other Africans. This is a photograph of most of the priests of the Diocese of Tirit. The bishop is in the front row wearing the red vestment. I'm standing in the back. It's from the retreat that I gave to the priests of the diocese last fall. One of the things that we've tried to do is to get material and spiritual support for the priests. A lot of these men live in communities where there is no electricity, there's no phone contact, they don't have a vehicle. They live on about $50 a month. And they're looked to because they're men who are educated by the other members of their family for school fees, medical needs. So they face a very, very difficult situation. But again, with the help of some of our friends, we've been able to just recently, for the conclusion of the year for priests, give gifts of liturgical items, clerical shirts, vestments. We've been able to get them mass stipends, other ways to try to build them up and support them in their ministry.
Father Herald, I would ask if you would put the people in our office here today, put your email and your mailing letter address here in the United States. Could we put that up on there? What is the email?
Well, I maintain a blog that many of these photos are taken from the blog. The address is www.cfrsudan.blogspot.com. And it's
Go a little slower because in the office here they're missing the ball here.
www.cfrsudan, all one word, .blogspot.com.
And that is coming through. Yes, okay.
Yeah. And the address as well is being posted there. The address can be found on the Blogspot, and it's also possible to make donations online to support the mission.
We don't, on our broadcast, specify helping particular things, but you're a speaker tonight, and we had to give you that. But I want to include all of you to be supporting to the missions. Catholics and Protestants, many Protestant missions
That's right.
going on. And our Jewish friends don't have missions like that, but our Jewish friends are very, very generous.
That's right, Father.
Particularly people in need, people that are hungry. Father, what's that picture?
That's the picture of the parish church. It's St. Peter Claver Church in a community called Looi. We also did evangelization there. You see one of the friars. I believe that's Brother Diego in the background. During the war years, the church was badly damaged. You can see the damage on the front door, and there's no roof. There are trees growing in the nave and in the sanctuary of the church. The Christians still gather there to pray. You can see the benches there. They just put little logs on two sticks coming out of the ground, and they gather there to pray Mass. There's a priest who's just been in residence there for a year now, who's trying to build the community back up. He doesn't even have a house. He lives in one of the rooms of the school. And the people there were so responsive to us. Someone came to me later and said that when the mission team was there, God landed in Looi. And they were so touched that people from outside the country would come to visit them and to be with them. We're there with members of our youth group. They chose the name the St. Daniel Comboni Missionary Youth. There are about 25 of them. We meet 3 or 4 times a week for faith formation, prayer. We also do some catechesis with small children. So we're having a meeting there on the veranda, talking about something to do with God, with the faith, and you can see how attentive they are. And they're very responsive as well. They want to help their people grow in faith. They recognize their need for God.
What is something I really want to mention? 50 years ago, Catholics and Protestants were very, very aware of foreign missions and supporting them. When I was a little kid in 2nd, 3rd grade, we had a little box that we put our 10 pennies and nickels in for the missions. And everything went to the foreign missions. We have our present Protestant chaplain of Children's Village here, and you're same thing. The Protestants did. That was, and suddenly, or not suddenly, over the years, we kind of lost the spirit of the foreign missions, and I'm hoping that this will be coming back.
There's a huge need. The situation has changed a bit, as you pointed out, Father, but the churches in developing countries need the solidarity and support of the developed countries. And you know what? We need them also.
Yes.
We need their witness of faith. We need their courage, their responsiveness. And maybe it's the time. Certainly we need priests and religious, and some communities like Missionaries of Charity, the Incarnate Word, the Brothers of St. John. But since the Second Vatican Council, we've come into, if you will, the era of the laity. And this is where, and Reverend Holby's here, our Protestant brothers and sisters really sometimes give a very inspiring example. In Turee Town, where I live, there is a retired medical doctor and his wife, Protestant missionaries, who coordinate an effort called the African Inland Mission. They place Americans and Europeans in villages, like some of the villages that we've seen there, to witness to Christ. And we, in some of the photos, you see lay people who have come to join missionary efforts. And many times for our Protestant brothers and sisters, it's their home church or a few churches that will support them. And there's no reason why our laity could not respond in a similar way. At the youth retreat today, this morning, I mentioned how the Mormons and evangelical Christian groups will send thousands of youth every year. And there's no reason why we couldn't do the same.
No, it's a wonderful thing.
This is a youth retreat in the mountain village of Isoke. And the young man who's speaking, his name is Peter Acheri. He's one of our youth who's giving his testimony to other Sudanese youth, which is a beautiful thing. And you see the image in the background there of St. Josephine Bakita, the Sudanese saint, who's also a great inspiring example to the Sudanese and to all of us. And you see the Blessed Sacrament is exposed there. The youth are praying. They're listening to one of their own. It was a wonderful experience.
Why don't you mention St. Bakita to our audience?
St. Josephine Bakita was born in the 1800s in Darfur, a very embattled region in recent times. She was kidnapped when she was about 9. She was sold 5 times in different slave markets, and one of her owners beat her so severely that she had more than 100 scars on her body for her entire life. She was finally purchased by an Italian diplomat who may have been inspired by St. Daniel Comboni. He brought her to Italy, and there she entered the catechumenate and she learned about God. And when the family that was hosting her wanted to take her back almost by force to work in Africa, she said no. She didn't want to lose God. And through her discovery of Christ, and she called him her true master, she acquired an incredible peace and compassion. She became a religious sister, a Canossian sister of charity, and she lived in a little place called Schio. And she was very humble, very quiet, spoke broken Italian, but people would come to her with prayer requests, concerns about their family in the war, and she had this amazing ability to share peace with them, to give them hope and encouragement. And they believed that it was her prayers and her presence that protected the town from bombings during the Second World War. Pope Benedict the 16th, in his encyclical Spe Salve, presents her to the whole church as an inspiring example of hope, of Christian hope.
And she is now a canonized saint.
She was canonized in the year 2000 by Pope John Paul II. Yeah.
Now we have a break, and I want to hear from our audience. You don't have to ask a question, but tell us something, or ask a question, and keep going. Don't stop. Get next to the phone. I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Our first caller is from James. And James, where are you from, and what are you going to tell us?
Hello. My comment or question is, could he elaborate a little bit on the lawlessness now present there, the danger also present for the missionaries there now?
Certainly in certain parts of Africa there's a social instability. Probably the most unstable place right now is Somalia, where there's a lot of just restlessness and some violence. And certainly in the recent past in Sudan and in Uganda, there have been dangerous situations. But it's not just danger for us. The local people are much more vulnerable to acts of aggression. What often happens is that missionaries, because they're in the thick of things, get caught in the crossfire. Sometimes they can be particular targets if they are witnessing to the gospel in a situation where there is resistance or hostility. Sometimes it's because they're with the poor and they're offering a hope that becomes a threat to other people. So there is a danger involved in that. But it's something that we take on knowing, not deliberately putting ourselves in any kind of danger. And thanks be to God, I've never felt myself to be in immediate danger. But hopefully we have the courage to follow the example of Christ, and many people who are willing to go into difficult situations to bear witness to Christ and to stand with people who are also living their faith in challenging circumstances.
We have a call now from Alice. Alice, where are you from and what are you going to tell us?
Hi, Father. I'm from Tucson, Arizona.
Oh, God.
And I'm a rosary maker, and I was wondering, is Father Herald going to go back to the Sudan? And could I send him rosaries, to take or to send to Sudan? Because I really feel like the people down there are probably in need of, spiritual nourishment. And it's funny because I felt like the Blessed Mother was compelling me this past month to make rosaries, and I wasn't sure what for, but I've made over 1,000, and they're ready to be ready to go to the post office right now. And I'm wondering if I send them to you, can you get them to the Sudan?
I may be able to bring some of them. We've distributed them, and they're very gratefully received. The problem is getting them there. The South Sudan has no functioning post office. Usually when I bring supplies, I bring them in my luggage and take extra luggage, but that's a little bit limited. So perhaps you could send some of them, a small amount, and I can put them in my luggage and take them along. They're very gratefully received, but the challenge is first of all, getting them to Nairobi, where I usually fly into, and then bringing them into Sudan. It's a bit expensive, but they are gratefully received. So maybe I can take a few. I'm not sure I could take quite 1,000, although they would be gratefully received. But it's part of the logistical challenge. There are no paved roads. There's no functioning postal service.
Oh, well, we have a call now from Cynthia. Cynthia, where are you from, and what's your question?
Hello?
You there?
Hello?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Father Groeschel. I can hardly hear you. I can hardly hear you. This is the second time I've talked to you in a very long time, in years. I'm an older mother. I'm 55. I got children who are 12 and 14, and I live here in New York. And I feel like we need missionaries here also to support our faith because, I understand that we need missionaries in Africa where the faith is so under physical attack. Here, we are under a spiritual attack. And it's so hard to raise children in the faith because they are so immersed in the secular culture. My children go to religious ed. I just had my 14-year-old confirmed, and she hardly learned anything in religious ed. 8 years? And I'm wondering, what are they teaching these kids? The minute these kids are confirmed, they stop going to church. She has a lot of friends who just go through confirmation so that they do not have to go to church and religious ed anymore. I mean, it's such a struggle.
Well, that's certainly true. There's a desperate need for the gospel in the United States, but I don't think the two are really opposed. When we were chatting before, Father, we talked about how when the church has an active missionary dimension to her life, it invigorates the places that send the missionaries, because it comes from an awareness of the need for the gospel, of the need to take our faith seriously, of the need to be generous. And our experience in Honduras, but also in Sudan, is that when, for example, lay people come, or when they become aware or involved with what's happening there, they become energized in their own faith. And I think one of the ways to really invigorate a parish is for that parish to take on a strong missionary commitment, because it pulls us out of our own concerns that can kind of swamp us sometimes. And it makes us aware of the needs of others and the struggles of others. And that can have a really transformative effect, particularly for young people, the young people that we've seen get involved in missions or go on mission trips. And here I might mention again the example of some of our Protestant brothers and sisters. There's organizations like Youth with a Mission or Teen Mania. And when young people are kind of on the front lines of preaching the gospel, something happens to them. So while I fully agree, we need vocations here, we need vocations elsewhere, we need to pray for vocations, encourage vocations, missionary vocations, and vocations locally.
It's also very important to say, which I have said many times, Catholic higher education in the United States is very sad. There are wonderful Catholic colleges, a few universities, but a great many of them are not doing their Catholic job. And unfortunately, often in a religious university or college, there is actually teaching contrary to the teaching of the Church, and sometimes very obviously contrary to the gospel. And this is why we need a reform. The other day I was meeting casually some young priests, all of whom I taught, and one or two of them became very annoyed that I said that the Church needs reform. What in the world would you be saying that? We desperately need the reformation of Catholic education. We have had something of a reformation in seminaries. Religious communities, some are coming back to life, but others are a disgrace. And I said that quite seriously. I'm going to do an evening on religious life at the present time has not in any way come up to the realities of it's meant to be, either canonically or even anthropologically. And many good sisters and brothers want to have a better religious life, but they're simply living as lay people.
It's actually one of the, in a mission setting, things are very basic. Yeah. And maybe one of the difficulties is we've gotten a little bit away from the basic reality of our faith and of life. And being in a situation where those questions are very clear, and sometimes matters of life and death can really help to clarify what's important.
If you took a review of some of the teaching in a number of so-called Catholic colleges and universities, it wouldn't be sort of right, kind of. It would be very, very scandalous, and it was, I'm far going to say, it brings into the eternal salvation of those who so badly teach what is supposed to be the gospel. We have a call from Sam. Sam, where are you from? What are you going to tell us?
I'm from Wallingford, Connecticut.
Yes, ma'am.
And I could just about hear, like the woman, a couple of speakers ago. How do you get the supplies and the medical supplies and the food and other things that the people need to them instead of being diverted or tied up by the bureaucracy or by a corrupt government like they did like happened in Haiti and in Chile?
Well, I have the benefit of being a very small operation. Almost everything in Sudan is imported from Kenya or from Uganda, and the grain that we used for the hunger relief was actually purchased in a section of Sudan where they had some rain. So I personally went and oversaw the loading of the grain onto the trucks and the driving of the trucks to the delivery, and so I was able to personally make sure that what was given was delivered to the people who needed it. And maybe I can just make this observation too. We live in a time where things are done in a big way by a lot of big organizations, but there's an incredible amount of room and need for personal initiative, small-scale acts of kindness, and those kinds of things are very personal, and almost by force I have to do it that way there, but that's a way that's very close to the style of the gospel, the style of Jesus. One person responding to the need of another. Myself making known the needs of people to those whom I know have some resources, and then being able to direct that. So at least in my case, I can say that I kind of duck under a lot of the superstructure of those kinds of things, and I was able to personally assure the delivery of those relief supplies and the other things that I'm able to distribute to the priests or to the people there.
I'd like to put a question from our audience here in the studio to Chaplain Holby. Chaplain Holby is chaplain of Children's Village. We worked together for many years, to Presbyterian minister, and we were talking. Chaplain, what are you going to tell us?
Well, I just wanted to ask Father Herald how the Christian faith is doing in the whole continent of Africa. Could you hear great things, but I'd like to hear your word from it.
Thank you, Reverend Holby, who is also a friend of mine from the time I worked with the Latino youth at Children's Village. The growth of the church in Africa is exponential. I mean, it's almost inconceivable. First of all, Africa is growing in terms of population. In the last 14 years, the population of Africa has grown by 250 million. It's approaching the 1 billion mark. And Christianity has grown in Africa right now there are about 470 million Christians who make up 21% of the world population of Christianity. And in the Catholic Church, which I'm a little more familiar with statistically, in the last 15 years, the church has grown by 60 million, Father Benedict. are 80 new dioceses. There are more than 100 additional bishops. In the last 15 years, the number of priests has grown by 10,000, and the number of religious by 15,000. It's almost incomprehensible. So, as I was mentioning before, there's this incredible responsiveness and receptivity, but there's also the need for the developed churches to accompany these young churches, who often, I mean, you saw the conditions in which they meet to worship. They're often lacking resources. There's a need for education. There's a need for encouragement. There's a need for support, not to dominate. It's not a kind of spiritual colonialism, but rather to walk with. Because as you were telling to me earlier, Father, in this millennium, in this century, the church in Africa is going to rise to the top. How can it not with that kind of growth? And who knows what we'll see in the future in terms of church leadership, in terms of missionaries. I believe you've had on your program the St. Paul missionaries from Nigeria, yes, who are actually sending missionaries now to the United States, and they serve also in the diocese where I am. And with that kind of growth, with the proper maturity and development, the church in Africa is going to make a huge contribution to the church in the world. And I think the Protestant church, the evangelical church, is experiencing similar growth there.
We have right here in New York, Archdiocese in Yonkers, we have a parish run by African missionary fathers, St. Barnabas Parish, and St. Bartholomew's Parish, I meant to say. And there they are, missionaries to the old Irish. We have a call now from Teresa Mary. Where are you from, Teresa?
I'm from California, from Fairfax, California. And it's wonderful to speak to you. I love you dearly. I pray for you. And thank you, Father, for being there. My question, comment, is that you mentioned before about people making substantial donations to the missions and even down to the level of children in our society. And I was thinking and wondering, do you think that today people rely on institutions, governmental institutions, the United Nations in particular, and so they've removed the personal responsibility that people used to feel for our missions and for our brothers and sisters? And as Father was saying, it energizes parishes and individuals to participate in these things. But do you think, I fear these institutions because of their agenda, forcing birth control, population control, all of those things. And I don't know that people really understand those agendas and how much they can affect developing nations. What can we do to get people to really, again, identify personally and take personal responsibility instead of shuffling it off to these big institutions?
Well, first of all, I share your concern. One of the struggles that Africa faces is a kind of secular ideology that is imported by governmental and non-governmental institutions. And if I can just pause to ask your prayers in a special way, the country of Kenya on August 4th will vote in referendum on a new constitution that both the Kenya Council of Churches and the Catholic bishops have strongly opposed because of an ambiguous statement about abortion. And that really underscores what our caller has just spoken about, the danger of exporting a secular culture of death into this beautiful continent of life. And I agree. I think what makes the difference often is when there's a personal connection, when you know somebody, when the missionary has visited your parish, when your parish has made a trip or made a commitment, because then it brings it home very close. And it underscores the need that Father was speaking about of reviving this sense of the missionary impulse, of the Great Commission of Christ at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. I shared that with the youth on retreat this morning. And it often takes somebody who is courageous or crazy enough to make a step. And I'm actually in Sudan because a consecrated laywoman went to the Diocese of Rumbek on her own. Another young man from New Jersey went to work with her. I knew him. He became my contact with the bishop. And I have the privilege of trying to be a link between people that I know in the U.S. and people that I know in Sudan. When it becomes personal, I think it can really move and motivate people. Yes.
We have a call from Rick. This is going to be our last call. Rick, where are you from and what are you going to tell us?
Hi, Father Groeschel, and hello, Father Herald. This is Rick from Vermont, and quick hi both from me, Father Herald, and from Molly. And was wondering if you might elaborate a little bit more about the opportunities for lay missionary work in the Sudan, both for individuals, younger people, as well as couples, and let's say people who are a little more mature.
This is the father of our sister Cecilia, Father Benedict, and he and his wife served as lay missionaries in Honduras. Sorry to disclose your identity there, Rick, but he's speaking from personal experience. They spent a year when he was on sabbatical in Honduras. There are opportunities, but at this point it takes people with a real spirit of adventure to come to Sudan because you might have to live in a tent for a while. You have to pump water out of a well. You might have electricity a few hours a day. But if you have that spirit of adventure, there are possibilities. We've had 3 teams of lay missionaries and friars come, and God willing, when the House of Mercy is complete and a little more development has taken place, there'll be a little bit of a softer landing pad for that kind of work. And it comes down to really, again, what I said before, the willingness, the generosity, the courage, to take that risk of going into unfamiliar territory. And it usually takes 1 or 2 people to pave the way, and then others can follow. We certainly have seen that with other cases of Catholic and Protestant missionaries who open the door and then provide that opportunity. So just to give an answer to Rick's question, there is a possibility, and hopefully it'll be a greater one.
Well, thank you very much, Father Harold, and all those who called in, and all our audience, and we're very grateful. I think each one of us should be praying for the foreign missions. That was part of Catholic life in the past. You prayed for the missionaries and for the people in the missions. And we want to thank all of you for watching us this evening. See us next week on Studying the Bible with Lavinia Spirito. Very interesting program. And I'm going to give you a blessing. May Almighty God bless each one of us in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
And may God give to all of our missionaries the courage and safety to bring the gospel to the end of the world. I'm going to be asking you, as usually, to support our cause, which we need. And our dear Mother Angelica knows that I'll be watching the program tonight, and I'll be saying that on air. Good night, Mother. And we're getting everybody to send a little something to keep things going at EWTN. We don't advertise dog food or anything else, or perfume or anything else. We just advertise the gospel. So let's help us.